Welcome to the Been There, Done That podcast with Angela Dunn Cartledge. Hi, everybody. This is the Been There, Done That podcast, and I'm your host, Angela Dunn Cartledge. I'm here with my new good friend, Shermin Cruz, and we are going to talk about emotional regulation today. Shermin, thank you so much for being here.
It's such a pleasure to be here. And hello, podcast listeners.
Excellent. I would love for you to tell the audience who you are, what you bring to the world, and why you're here today.
I'm an immigrant. I was born in Iran. My family immigrated to Canada in 88. So I grew up in Iran as a child and then moved as a preteen to Canada. And I was in Toronto for a really long time. And then I moved to the States for law school and it sort of stuck. And so I've been in America now for, like more than a quarter of a century and an American citizen for some time. So I would say just been around the block a couple of times, lived through a handful of different regimes and been in conflict zones. And I really am fascinated more than anything by human nature. And I'm a student of human nature. And so I have tried to spend most of my life pursuing some of the answers to some of the big questions. And that is what led me to my most recent book, Stoic Empathy, which is essentially about the intersection of emotional regulation and empathic awareness. The most important thing about me is I'm a mom of four little monkeys, and they are adorable and difficult and magical and extraordinary and special and weird and all the things. Most of my income over the last quarter of a century has been earned through a large legal practice, especially relating to multinational corporations and such. So I have a lot of experience in the leadership space as well, in the multinational negotiation space. So sometimes I'll come at things from that perspective. But now I'm retired and I teach and I write and I talk to brilliant people like Angela Dunn.
You have such a multifaceted story that I love. But to your point, the book was what sort of brought us together on human nature and what we do in those emotional moments with each other is really, really important stuff. And especially when it comes to grieving, hurting, those moments when we are not exactly at our healthiest place mentally and definitely in our hearts better.
Yeah, absolutely. So stoicism is something that is often misunderstood in today's society and has been interpreted to be a lack of emotion or emotion absence or a sort of a tough exterior that is untouchable. It is not what stoicism is. Stoicism is literally emotional regulation. It's looking at the way the ancients approached the ideas of thoughts, judgments, emotions, right? On the one hand, things that are internal within us, and then justice on the other hand, which is something that occurs external to us. And really it is about acting in a manner that is consistent with our own moral code, whatever that moral code is, and being able to maximize our control over our own emotions to the greatest extent possible. And then empathy is also often misunderstood to be something weak and flowery and highly emotive. I am going to walk a mile in your shoes, or it can be, I'm going to walk a mile next to you and I'm going to smell what you smell and see what you see and hear what you hear and better understand your perspective at coming to the world, right? Without feeling everything you feel. Why? Because that might be unhealthy for me, or it might not serve you, right? Or it might just be the wrong thing to do in that scenario. And it's up to me to decide where I'm going to be on that scale, how emotionally connected versus how intellectually aware I'm going to be, depending on the circumstances. So stoicism and empathy really come together in the following way. The empathy is how we gain awareness over our environment, the people around us, and therefore maximize our ability to assist, advocate, and also influence. And stoicism is our ability to understand how we are right here on the inside, right? And increase our understanding of that and be able to advocate within ourselves. In other words, power external and then power internal are how the two come together. And the idea would be to try to approach the world in a manner that it has packs as much integrity as possible, but also as much authenticity as possible.
And gives us the space to do that. It feels like a construct that is also flexible in terms of it's individualized. We can do this in our own ways, and even in within our own ways within specific scenarios that we can mold it to be what we need it to be in any given scenario. Am I hearing that right?
Not only are you hearing that right, but you're so spot on in so many ways because honestly, well, Stoicism, nor anything that I teach or talk about has anything to do with moralizing with anybody or telling somebody what the correct judgment is in a particular instance. It's really about helping people act in accordance with their own judgments. And, how many people out there, I'm raising my hand first, have done things that are inconsistent with their own values, right?
Yes.
Or even,
Yes.
and it doesn't even have to be a big thing. You get in a fight with someone like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Or it's great that I did that, but I wish I had said this. Or I wish I had said that. Or I wish I had walked away at this point. Or what it is, the whole idea behind this method of teaching isn't to tell you whether you should have walked away or stood and fought. That is up to you, right? And I'm not in that situation. I can provide some guidance, some general guidance, right? But as a general matter, it's going to be up to you to make a decision and to act in accordance with that decision at the time, right? And then also to reflect on it in a way that is positive, as in, I'm not going to dwell on all the things I did wrong, but I am going to reflect on them because that's a fight I lost. Tomorrow, I want to win the fight. So, how am I going to, or I want to avoid the fight, whatever it might be, right? And so, how am I going to approach that situation tomorrow? And I'm going to learn from my mistakes, like the way a sports team might watch a recording of a game, not so that I can torture myself for the rest of my life about all the things I did wrong, but so I can work on my such and such past. You know what I mean?
So I can learn. Yeah, it's a learning process of an actual it educates us on how we can respond differently in the same or a similar scenario. And I really love the idea that we can that we're doing it for our betterment, that we're doing it's not about what they take from the situation, it's what we bring to the table and how we're responding to the world. And that truly to me is self-awareness. That's the thing we want the most of, is to be able to affect our own, like I said, responses, but really how we perceive and how we move through this world, and not in a destructive way, but in a constructive way, to your exact point. That is really different than what we have been taught to this point.
Yes,
Very different. Yeah.
100%. And it's not at all emotional suppression, but it is, here's an emotion. It is information. The information is relevant to me. There's all sorts of other information that is available to me, right? Environmental context, who else is present in the room, what my capabilities are in this situation, what can I get away with, what can I not get away with, how can I be most useful or least harmful, how can I, that's all also information. And the goal is then to take that information and instead of becoming a slave to any particular piece of it, be the master of it all and be the juggler and determine how much of the anger you're feeling is going to be utilized in the following way, right? Because of the following reasons, right? Or how much of it is going to be controlled in the following way because of the following reasons. And it's one of the things I talk to my kids about all the time is, the reality is that I think most of the times in life when you come to a crossroads, you know what the right path is. It's rare that you don't. It happens from time to time, but most times it's just harder. And and I'll say this for myself, and this is a deeply personal example. I suffered a extremely meaningful loss this summer, and my family and I canceled our trip. We like to spend the summers abroad, usually do some cultural exploration. We had planned on going all over Guatemala, myself, my husband, and our 4 kids, and be present at funerals and services and shivas and mourning rituals and things like that. And at some point I pulled my kids aside and I said, listen, it's okay if you're disappointed that you're here instead of in Guatemala. Nobody wants to be mourning.
Right.
No,
Nobody wants this situation to happen.
right.
Exactly.
Nobody else that's here in the immediate family, right? Who's grieving, genuinely grieving, would rather be here than on some jungle trek in Guatemala, picking up lizards off the trees. So, and the reality is, it's okay if you're annoyed by that. What's more important is that you understand that the right thing to do is to be here, and then that you pride yourself on the integrity and the strength that it takes sometimes to do the right thing, because it can be very emotionally difficult. It can be very emotionally difficult to remain in the room, right? It can be very emotionally difficult, but it might be the right thing to do, right? And so you do it. But that doesn't mean you suppress the emotions. You allow them to inform you, but you are their master. It's not the other way around.
And I really love that you brought up your children in this situation because um, I wanted to ask what we do in those cases where we have built a construct um, built on false narrative or on generational dysfunction. Those are just the two examples I can think of off the top of my head. And we grow up thinking that these constructs, these ways of communicating in those moments are appropriate. And then as we get to a certain whatever age that is, we realize they're no longer appropriate. That's not the actual way that will be the most constructive in those ways. How do we undo those gnarly bits and really create new constructs in those moments?
So this is a very interesting question. I actually have a really good friend of mine who does talk about it in the context of parenting. And what she says is, I reparented myself by parenting my child. And I thought, gosh, that's really powerful. You know what I mean? Like, she understood what the right thing to do, and therefore changed herself as a result of that parenting effort. And it doesn't have to just be in a parenting context, right? It can be in a leadership context, it can be in a teaching context. I find often that the magic is in the interaction between people, because even if you're the only one imparting quote unquote wisdom, you are learning from it. And even if you're lecturing, I was actually talking to another friend of mine yesterday who was getting lectured by her brother because he's on this vulnerability kick, and she's been expressing vulnerability her whole life, but he never has. But now he's talking about it, not really doing it, but talking about it, and telling her that she needs to do it. And she was so frustrated, and I was like, yeah, I totally get it. That's really frustrating. And he's thinking about it. And by imparting it to you, believe it or not, it's helping him get to a more vulnerable place. So as long as we are able to do that same thing, but with greater humility, of course, uh, rather than hubris, and approach things in that way. And then the other way I like to think about it is, do you remember how we were in college? Or I don't know how, like, if you guys do any after school courses or after work classes or anything like that. But this idea that you can just learn something completely new. Like, I'm going to learn how to make craft cocktails, or I'm going to go to a candle making class, or I'm going to make this idea that I am going to take whatever this is and build another layer upon it. It doesn't in any way invalidate what this is, right? And I think if you see yourself, they called it a tell in the ancient times when they build a city on top of a city on top of a city. Just think of yourself like a tell. You're building cities on top of cities, and the cities underneath are not just still in existence, but they form the very foundation of this city. You can celebrate those too. And they are, in fact, architectural and historical marvels. And so it's not a loss or a defeat. It's just another layer. And what's really cool about my old mind frame is that it informs this new mind frame in a way that other people don't know how to tap into. And that's what makes me special and magical, because I come at this, let's say vulnerability or anxiety or grief or whatever it is, I come at this thing with my background and this trauma that happened to me and this recovery that I faced and this fight where I didn't get back up. Right. And I, therefore, have something unique to bring into this space precisely because of the layering effect, right? And so, at least that's the approach that I take. And I find that it works well for me in the sense that it allows me to contain and continue on the growth mindset without developing hubris, but also without being insecure. It's because you don't want to be like, oh God, everything I think, everything I do, everything I think is wrong. I was raised the wrong way. I did everything wrong. It's not about that at all. Maybe there's a lot of things that you now think are wrong that you previously thought were right or didn't even reflect upon. How extraordinary is that? That now, because of those prior actions, you can bring that perspective into this conversation.
I really love the concept that it's not about regret. It's not about being able to pile on not helpful feedback to yourself and make that harder to work through, but to treat it in the opportunity that it is, and that is as a learning opportunity to be able to build on it. And that layering imagery that you gave, what a beautiful way to think about it and to relate to the different seasons that we have in our lives and the benefits that we gained during each of those seasons, um, to build that architecture on top of each other. And that is such a it's just such a beautiful image, and gives me a positive way to look at those foundational cities, those foundational layers, but also to take from it the beauty that it provided to be able to build on top of it. That is um, such a cool way, and again, empowering way. To your point, it's so powerful to think about it in a way that isn't defeating, isn't demotivating, demoralizing. That we're going at it from a totally different perspective in the way to learn and
Yeah.
move forward.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree. And one of the things I think about when I think about it in the architectural context is also where the foundation is weak and I really can't build upon until I strengthen the foundation, and where it's strong and I can build upon, and the significance of working on both of those at the same time. So there's some things that I really think I want to get to that I'm really quite far away from. And there's other things that I really want to get to that I'm just crushing. And my foundation is just going to be different than yours because your old living room was built in a different section of the house than my old
Yeah.
living room.
It's in a totally different part of your layer. Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
layout is just completely different. So it's not about you versus me. I do want to emphasize though that I do believe in. I agree that I don't believe in regret, but I do believe in guilt. If you really do something wrong and you feel bad about it, I actually think that's good. That is again an emotion informing you. My point is don't sit there and dwell on the guilty feelings, but take this emotion that's informing you. Maybe it's giving you information about your own ethics, knowledge, integrity, or what it is you want to do next, and then convert it and move forward utilizing it, because every minute is the beginning of the rest of your life, right? And it's taken, and it's not going to, and many people listening to this podcast know it's not going to last for any of us, right? So whatever time, and by the way, and it's mostly a gift. We don't really know, right? We can't really control when our time is going to be up or the time of people we love. And so if we're able to move our layering and move our growth in relation to that, and then allow the emotions, and again, there's no such thing, in my opinion, as a bad emotion, but there are bad ways in which emotions can affect you. So you have to be really careful in how you interface with the emotion, how you approach it, how you talk to it. There's a lot of this in Buddhism as well, by the way. I don't know if you guys talk about mindfulness or Buddhism on this podcast at all, but there's a lot of this in Buddhism as well.
Hey there, it's Angela from Been There, Done That. If you're navigating the wild, unpredictable world of grief, I want to invite you to something special. It's called Messy Mornings, and it's our free weekly newsletter filled with real talk, gentle reminders, and support that actually meets you where you are. Each week, I'll send you stories, reflections, healing prompts straight to your inbox. No fluff, no pressure, just the space to release, feel, and heal. You don't have to do this alone. Head over to donethatpodcast.com and sign up for Messy Mornings. It's totally free and it's made with you in mind. I've been there, and let's walk through this together. That's really fascinating. The concept that I'm using the emotion as a tool and not as a weapon. We don't want to use it in that destructive way. We're intending to use it in a beneficial way. And I'm still thinking about the comment that you made about guilt and how, again, in framing it as learning, that you are building off of the thing that you created in the first place, even if it is a terrible decision or a terrible action. The thing that grows on top of it is the important piece. What did you do in response to that? What did you do as a result of that? That is big stuff.
100%. That is where wisdom lies. Wisdom
Yes.
lies in that space, not in getting it right in the first instance. That's just luck.
Half the time, right? I mean, it is just the kismet that is the world
Right,
that just, oh, look at that.
right.
The sun shined and that created this. It is
100%. Sometimes it's how tired you were that day or how hungry you were that day or like, the other things that happened to you that day. And by the way, the same thing is true of other people who you interact with and interface with who do things that may or may not be correct or incorrect. It is the wisdom lies in what now, not on what then. That is not where wisdom lies. We draw wisdom from it, but it's always like a moving forward sort of thing. And to the extent that we're imparting it upon people who are less experienced than us, it's literally, you have to think of them as 7 layers below. And listen, they might have a perfect structure. It might be perfect. It might be a lot more perfect than your structure was 7 layers ago. But that doesn't change the fact that you have 24 structures. You have layered and learned from each of those. And therefore, you have something extremely unique. By the way, it doesn't mean they don't have something extremely unique, right? They do. They have something very unique, and they're coming at things very differently because they're coming at things in a different climate and with a different moisture level, and with, like, really, if you think of it as underground cities, like, just the universe that they're in is so completely different that they're building in. And so you have a lot to learn from that too. But it's really about, at the end of the day, it's really about you and the approach that you take towards that growth and that development and your emotional state in any given moment. And then the trick then becomes in really looking at that space that is between stimulus, right, and response, right? So event and hopefully wisdom, right? And everything that happens in between there, because not everything that happens in between there is 100% in your control, right? But some of them are, namely judgments, emotions, right? Feelings, thoughts, and then what you decide to do when the next stimulus comes.
Is I really can see so many pathways in that. If your default response, again, it goes back to the destruction. If it goes back to you always get angry if so and so happens, or if you always cry, and I mean that in a good way, actually, if you always cry because so and so happens, there are there are ways to break the path, to fix that path so that the answer becomes a better, a more wise answer to your point. And it feels iterative. It's always a moment where we can, even though we did it 12 times this way, the 13th time can be this way, but the 14th time can look completely different even than the 13th time, all by
And it's
adding.
thrilling, right? Isn't that kind of thrilling and exciting? And the world of possibilities. And what's also really exciting about that is this idea of a non-fixed sense of self. Like there might be
Mm,
a handful of things that are fixed about me, but really at the end of the day, I am moving through this world, and who I am today, who I am this minute is probably different than who I was an hour ago, because the things I'm thinking about, talking about, the people I'm interfacing with, I'm constantly moving, I'm constantly changing, right? As an organism, constantly interfacing with myself and with my environment. And to the extent that you believe a soul, a mind, a willpower, whatever it is you want to call it, also constantly interfacing with that thing, to the extent that you believe it exists, right? Your consciousness, essentially, right? And so I'm not fixed. And there's something really extraordinary and a little scary about that. And it also requires a massive amount of understanding and empathy about other people's state of being. And it doesn't mean that there should be any excuses at any given time for action or inaction that's wrongful or immoral. It just means you understand how it got there, and you also have a core understanding that it's not fixed. And both of those things can help you, even if all you're doing is being an advocate, even if all you're doing is trying to change someone's mind, right? If that's all you're doing, that'll get you 95% of the way there. You have to first believe that you can. And if you look at the history of humankind, and if you look at the evolution of our mental states and the ways in which we approach the world, even from, purely nomadic to agrarial to industrial to like just the way we move as societies, we do not have fixed states as humans. And so it's just a necessary condition of our life is change on a deep cellular level. So accepting that and then kind of going with the flow of it and trying to steer it as much as possible is really, really very exciting.
and allowing. I mean, it is very, I
Yes.
find it incredibly hopeful at the same time that not only is it dynamic and allows me to evolve, but it also allows you to, and allows my children to, and allows the couple down the street to, and someone in a completely different country that I've never met. We all have that capability, and I so appreciate the permission that you are giving us by educating us on this process, because it gives us power to be able to say, I can learn and still be different in 30 seconds
Right.
from
and
what
still and
just.
still be confident and
Yeah.
proud of who I am and enter a room. I always used to say in my 20s, I thought, man, I was the smartest thing that ever lived. And I would walk into every room and I would want to prove to everyone in that room that I was smarter than they were. And that was my goal. And then I kind of got to my 40s, especially now my late 40s. And I walk into a room and I'm like, I'm pretty smart, but I could be smarter. I wonder if I could find that one person who can who can make me a little smarter coming out than I was going in. And my goal just changes completely because I continue to have confidence about my level of intelligence, but my approach to the room is now completely different. Now I'm looking for other people's insights and wisdoms to be layered upon my own, and happy to share as well always, but that's not the main purpose. The main purpose is to walk away better, stronger, wiser, smarter, more in control, kinder, all of these things, right? Because I can. And I believe that I can. And I believe that every person in this universe, and maybe even every four-legged little creature in this universe, can teach me one thing, even if it's just one thing, one little nugget of, from their layers, from their experiences that I don't have access to. And that's going to add to me. And it's a very different way to approach a room, especially if you're in the corporate world and you're networking, because now you don't walk up to someone and immediately start talking about what you do, but you come up to someone and you're immediately trying to figure out what is it that makes them interesting. And that's a very different conversation. And you actually meet a lot more people, form a lot better relationships than just
It's
one
much
program.
more empowering to everyone. I really do. I see that as so much more constructive. I know I keep using that word because
No,
you did, and I really do love the word though, because it is so it's so beneficial across the board. Not only are we bettering ourselves, but we are giving that energy out at the same almost the same rate that we're taking it in. It's
it's
super
actually,
fun.
it's one of the things I talk to my TEDx speakers about a lot. I'm a TEDx producer and I've produced the TEDx talks of over 80 people. And one of the things that I always talk to them about is we need to find that thing about you that is magic. And sometimes you'll get someone that'll say, okay, but not everybody has a magical thing. And I'll say, I swear to you, they do. There could be a grocery store clerk who has learned how to exuberant joy out of mundane repetition. And there are. Every once in a while, you meet them. You go up to them in the grocery store line, and they're just so freaking happy. And you're like, "Why are you happy? You're just scanning eggs all day long. Like, how is that making you happy?" And but it is, you know. And there could be an Uber driver that views their car as a way to transport someone in a safe way between two different spaces and to provide a macro space of healing. I met him. I gave him an Uber, a TED talk, so I know he exists. So the reality is, obviously, their knowledge of the world is going to be very different than the botanist who's lived in the rainforest her whole life and can talk to you about mycelial networks and how trees talk to each other using them. But that
Mhm.
doesn't make it any less important, right? And so I believe me, everybody's got their thing. And it's an extraordinary pleasure because sometimes I find myself in the position of pulling that thing out of people. By the way, often it's not one. It's like 157, but I'm just using one for purposes of this conversation. And then you draw that out, and when you draw it out and they verbalize it, and they realize, oh my God, I'm like really cool and different from other people in the following really incredible ways. Some of it because of all this horrible stuff that happened to me, and yeah, and some of it because of the way that I've chosen to look at all the horrible stuff that happened to me.
The layers again. It's the way that we build on those layers and what we do with those layers that are so critical. It makes me think of baking, of all the like the lamination that happens when you're making a croissant or several other kinds of pastry where there's lots and lots of layers and you're having to build on those layers in order to make it work. Now my mouth is watering. See what happened?
Honestly, all I can do right now is picture myself biting an almond chocolate croissant from my favorite French bakery, Old Town in Chicago.
Sorry, I brought it up.
But really, I think the trick there, and so staying on the food metaphor, I think the trick there is to think about the perfect bite. I mean, you know, the perfect bite when you have just the right amount of pistachio and just the right amount of salt and just the right amount, and it's all comes together beautifully. And it's a constant formulation, right? And you could make the same croissant every day. And it still would never, it would not be the same croissant every day. It would be different. And but it would be an extraordinary experience to go in there and to create this thing and to have dominion over it. And that's where a lot of the stoicism material comes in, is in how do you gain dominion over that, right? How, instead of it accidentally happening. As a baker, you completely understand. But as a human, often we feel overwhelmed, right? But as a baker, we are controlled by our access to ingredients, by, you know, 50 million other things that are happening in our household that day, in our kitchen that day. There's a, by the tools that we have at our disposal, or by the crack that is on the stove, or whatever. We all have things that contribute to the way in which these croissants come out, right? But that doesn't change our mastery and the space for our mastery. And that's the important thing to see.
I've never really thought about my emotional state or the emotions that I feel in a given moment, in a given day, as being something I can learn from. It is just so empowering to think about it in a way, um, that just turns everything on its head and flips the script around to be more, again, more hopeful, but also that it is very doable. We're not talking about something that is only for specific people. This is a human experience that can be learned. And that is learning in general to me is hopeful.
Yeah, I
If
agree.
Why would you be wanting to learn something new if you didn't have hope that it would do something good for you and for the world? So I think there's just so much beauty in that concept. I am so excited about it. It just is, again, another way for us to do better,
I love that.
for us to do better. Yeah.
That. I love that. And it's easy to conceive of when you think of it in other contexts, but it's also easy to conceive of when you think of it in an emotive context, in a therapeutic, perhaps, let's say, exposure therapy, right? Let's say I'm really sensitive to the cold. So every day I turn the temperature on my shower down just slightly, just so that I can increase my tolerance to the cold. Or I'm really afraid of heights. And I go up one step and then I go up two steps. I mean, it's really not rocket science. I gradually and slowly adjust myself and my body to these changes. It doesn't mean that I, who's extremely sensitive to the cold, should jump right into the ice bath. Maybe it could, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, right? I need to
It probably wouldn't go as well as if you did it in a more
well,
gradual
but sometimes you need to dive into, like, it's up to you to make that determination and that decision for yourself in a given situation based on the various factors that are available to you, including likelihood of success. And so, and just because you can't dive in, it doesn't mean you're failing, right? You are slowly increasing your tolerance, and you might never be able to dive into an ice bucket. And no matter how many articles you read about the benefits of ice bath immersion, you might in your whole life be like, that's crazy, I'm never doing that, and never actually do it and be okay. But what you must acknowledge is that it is important for you to increase your tolerance to the cold or to the heat or to discomfort of confrontation or to vulnerability or to whatever it is that you yourself have determined is holding you back in life, right? Not what I think is holding you back, but what you think is holding you back.
so important. And not to allow those things to be emotions, not to allow those things to be past experiences, whether they be mistakes or not, whatever that looks like. I just feel so powerful. It's such an empowering feeling and a hopeful feeling to have a tool that that I actually feel like I can learn. This
I
is
love that.
incredible. That's incredible. Tell us, if you could give one practical thought, one parting shot, I like to call it, to the audience. What would you give the audience that they could take away from this episode and be able to apply to their lives right now?
If I were to just leave you with one, and I'll tell you there's hundreds in the book, but if I were to just leave you with one, I would say start with this. Remember that the goal is to control as much as possible the space between stimuli and response. What makes that easier is actually expanding that space, right? So if you were an athlete, you would call it slowing the game down. Like a baseball player might see that ball coming, honestly, slower than you and I would. They can not just keep their eye on it, but they can control and coordinate their hand movements in response to it. How and why? Okay, there's some aspect of raw talent. It's mostly experience, right? It's mostly practice. And so, really, if you think of it that way, literally, I can expand, I can change time between when someone screams at me and the response, okay? So that I can have more space in here in order to move with intention and move in a way that is the way I want to be, as opposed to an impulse. Doctor hit my knee and it popped up, right? So what I want to do is I want to move out of impulsive behavior and into intentional behavior. One way of doing that is exposure, is practice, right? So I'm not saying put yourself in an abusive relationship and get yelled at every day, but you might think about maybe taking up a sport or a physical activity wherein you're constantly surprised by things that are coming at you at any given moment, right? I myself took up hand-to-hand combat, and I physically just needed things to come at me. Other people pursue yoga or meditation as ways of slowing things down for themselves, right? I have a friend of mine who's so conflict averse. And the way he practiced just exposure to conflict is every time he went to Starbucks, he just asked for a free shot of vanilla. And if they said no, he had to pay an extra 75 cents. There was very low stakes. In other words, it was a very controlled environment, but he was able to consistently exercise asking for something. Right. And then when he went in to negotiate his salary, I'm not saying he became the world's best negotiator, but he was at least able to ask for what he felt he deserved. Right. And get some portion of it, more than he would have otherwise, and therefore find himself in a better position because of the fact that he had exposed himself to that. My husband is deeply uncomfortable with emotional vulnerability. He has a really hard time saying, I love you, or you're beautiful, or things like that, for a variety of reasons. And so one of the things that he has become practiced at after 20 years of being married to me is, and I don't mean like fake it till you make it, but like you go out there and you become the person who can say those things. And a lot of us who've been through grief have had to do this before. It's like we've become the person who goes to work that day because we really don't want to go to work that day. We've become the person who fed the kids a healthy meal that day because really we just wanted to lay there and order another pizza. And we've all done this before, and the habit does actually change. So if there's one thing that you do, identify the one thing that you would really, really like to expand the space between stimulus and response, and then practice it in a safe, controlled setting. Practice it for yourself, and then give yourself time and exposure, just like you would if you were a pro baseball.
And it's so cool to think about it being just a tiny expansion of that risk. At first, even the smallest amount of risk feels ginormous, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you're talking about now it feels like miles that I'm having to walk, but you're only moving a fraction of an inch. And then as it expands, so do you. And it is so beautiful. I love that one. That's beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
How can we find you? How can we work with you? How can we find the book? What can we do to work with
Well,
Shermin?
thanks for asking. The book is available everywhere that books are sold, but I like to tell folks I won't judge you if you order it on Amazon. But it is, I press that button and Jeff Bezos is delivering packages at my house every 3 minutes. So no judgment. But it is also available at your local bookstore if you wanted to support your local bookstore. Target, Walmart, wherever it is you want to buy your books, that's where you'll find it. I am online, mostly Instagram, LinkedIn, and I have just moved on to Substack. I also just started writing for Psychology Today. So I have I'm really excited. I'm on my like fifth article or something like that. I just started recently. And so you're welcome to read my materials there as well. It's not as good as an interface as social media, but you're welcome to look up the material there. There's some good stuff there, and it's all free and publicly available. And then I am also available for public speaking. If that's something that you or your corporation might be interested in, I would be happy to come and talk to you guys.
Love it. I'm just taking notes, but that's fantastic. Thank you so much for all of this, for being willing to impart your wisdom on us and allow us to learn in this way. I really, I can feel the energy shift just since we started talking, not just with me, but I know that this is going to really, really affect people. And I can't wait to see all the learning and all the beauty that comes out of it. Thank you so very much.
The pleasure was absolutely mine. And I can't wait to steal your croissant metaphor and use it everywhere I go.
I'll be listening to all the TED Talks now. And
Right. She's talking about croissants and how they're akin to our personalities, because that was my idea.
I helped. I helped everyone. I helped.